Good morning, it's Colleen from Millie Peas. I am so excited to show you a demo of Millie Peas 1 hour pouch. This is such a fun project and I want to walk you through the steps so we can demystify this pattern for you. So this was the original 1 hour pouch and this is about 8.5 inches by 10 inches and I love this size. You also have enough fabric and to use the entire length of your zipper, which is 18 inches. And look how cute this is. Judy Nemi made this sample for us, and that is also so cute. So please think as you're doing this pouch, once you know all the steps, think improvise. Think, how big would I like to have this pouch? Maybe I'd like to get another zipper and make 2 of all of the things I have. So just think improvise here. Okay, so the first thing you'll do when you get your kit, you'll have the Soft and Stable, which is a great product that we just love. You'll have 2 fat quarters, and you can decide which one you want to be your main and your lining. That's entirely up to you, and I'm actually going to show you a trick on piecing. So if you wanted to have Minnesota with a little bit of the gold check, you could do that too. And then of course you have your zippity doo done zipper. The first thing you want to do, the very first thing you want to do, is grab your zipper, and I'm going to show you using the overhead camera. Get out your sewing machine and just straight stitch this. You're not going to zigzag this. Straight stitch this ends of this zipper closed on both ends. The zippity doo done zippers don't have a stop on them, so it's very easy when you're working with this for your pull to come off your zipper. Now that's not going to be the end of the world. You can put that pull back on your zipper, but it's much easier if you just take 2 seconds, add a stop on each end of your zipper, and you're ready to go. Alrighty, so step 2 then is to take your fabric. In this case, I've got my Quilt Minnesota 2021 fabric, and I have a really fun lining. This is a shabby kind of a shabby look, and I made my sandwich and did some quilting here, and you may notice that I took 1 stripe from the pictorial stripe fabric and then I added this print below it, and I think it's really cute. Now if you've heard me before talk about doing these kinds of things, I'm not overly fussy in how I do this quilting. Usually I'll look for a landmark on the print and follow that print for a couple reasons. First of all, why not? It's just easy. Second of all, if my measurement is off at all, it's going to really be apparent as you look at the print. Your eye is going to compare this stitching line against this birch tree log and tell you if it's level or off or straight or not. So use your prints because they are going to help you quite a bit. And you'll notice that I did this throughout. So I layered, I'll lay these side by side so you can see this. I layered my this print first, and I did cut a nice stitching line here so that I was sure I would get a nice seam. And then I did the similar thing. I cut a nice stitching line on this side, and I laid the lining fabric wrong side up, and then the Soft and Stable, and then this print, and then I put this one on top because I wanted to be able to see, again, using my birch log here, I wanted to see a little bit of that blue sky. So I didn't want my seam allowance to be so large that I lost that little bit of blue. Again, not necessary, but it's pretty. So then once I stitched these 2 pieces together, so there's a seam here, and why don't I can open this and show you what I mean by that. Let me just take this off a little bit, so you can see where my seam is right here. Okay, and then I pulled this up, and the first thing I did was a stitch in the ditch right here, and that just seemed to make it look a little bit more finished. And then I decided to stitch across these intersection of these birch logs. The first one I did, I only did these two. I didn't stitch through the cardinal, but for this scale of a print, it actually looked kind of funny. So I went back in and I did every row. And it's very, very, very little quilting actually. So then I cut these to size. This is 10.5 inches by 13 inches. Now the pattern would have you cut 10.5 inches wide, actually 8.5 inches tall by 10.5 inches wide. And I thought, I have all this really pretty print, I'm going to take advantage of it. So I decided to make this one taller. So that my next step then will be to add my zippity-doo done zipper. Now it doesn't matter where the pull is in terms of it going left to right for this particular bag, because there's no front and no back. But I tend to like having the pull. Well, I forget that I have the overhead camera. I tend to like having the pull, so when I pull from left to right, the bag comes open. So think about that if your bag has a right side and a wrong side. But this one doesn't, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to simply insert my my top of my soft and stable, and I don't need to really force that. I just want a nice snug fit. I am going to grab a ruler and then I'm going to measure this, because I do want this to look nice and finished. So right now I've got 3¼ inches, and I might just change that a little bit. I'm looking at this seam line right here. I've got 3¼ inches from that seam to the bottom of the zippity-doo done zipper. So I'm going to put a pin right there. And then I'll do the same thing here. So matter of fact, I'm going to use the zipper in the way it was intended. This is what's nice about this zipper. So that's locking. So then I'll do this one, and I'll adjust that zipper a little bit, and I'll put a pin in here. And I'm not fond of pinning, but I'm less fond of ripping. So this is one where I really do pin. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. And you can see if I hadn't measured that, I might end up with that in the wrong place. So I'll pull that up just enough so that it is nice and straight across. Okay. All right, and of course I put the pins in the wrong way, but that's okay. The pins really should be this way. Okay, now I'm going to go to my machine, and here's a trick. I really want I really wanted to stitch this in a red thread, so I didn't change out my bobbin thread because that doesn't really matter, but I did put a red thread in my top thread. So here I go. I'll do a back stitch here so that I'm sure that that locks, and I'm going to work right at about 1/8 inch. In fact, here I'm using the foot of the Juki machine as my guide for my seam allowance here, or where my stitching line should go. This is an awesome machine. I can't wait till Judy does her demo on this machine, because then I'm going to learn how to use the threader. Okay, I'll go back again and then watch this. Magic! So I'll pick this up. Look at how nice that looks. And then you can see on the back there's my white thread. But it's okay. It's my inside. And then I typically go back and I don't measure here at all. I put my... I basically, for this next stitching line, I'm midway between the edge of that zipper and the zipper teeth. Okay. And I just eyeball that and then do one more row of stitching. And the zipper pull is never in the way. and I'll backspace again here, backspace, and I'll do that. And so I like that look. I think it looks very finished and pretty. And then of course my next step would be inserting the zipper, inserting the other side of the bag in the zipper and continuing. Okay, so now you know how to add the zipper. Okay, I've changed out the thread on the machine. I have the red thread on top and the white thread in the bobbin, and I've gone back to white on top and white in the bobbin for the rest of the project. So I'm making the last steps on a bag that is the See Us, Love Us, and I think we may have some of these kits left. So if any of these kits, be sure and search 1 Hour Pouch, or even just search on the word pouch in milliepeas.com or on the app to find these kits, and we're adding them all the time. So the first step is to sew the sides of your seam closed, and you'll bet I always start at the top when I'm sewing this seam closed, because I want this seam, I want this side to meet. I want the tops of the zippers to meet. So I start here, I backstitch a few times, and then I continue down. And I'll just do that again just to show you what that looks like. So needle down, presser foot down. I love this Suzuki machine, and I can go in reverse, and I don't go super fast. First of all, if I go too fast, I have to take this out because see, I can't talk and do this at the same time. So what happened here is I started going too fast, and my little seam allowance got pulled up into my seam. So I'll go back here, and I'll give you a tip on that, because that tends to happen. When you're doing a little seam allowance, on something like Soft and Stable, it really helps to have a stiletto, or I use my seam ripper for this to hold that seam allowance out of the way, because I don't want that to get sewn into my seam. I really want to cover that. Okay, so I'll backstitch here, and then my presser foot will cut that thread, which love, love, love. Okay, then I like to cover this seam. So I have a 1.5 inch strip of the lining fabric. I'm going to, of course, it's not a very nice cut. This isn't a very, there, okay. Keep your fingers out of the way. And so I'm folding that down just a little bit, and I will put that on top of my seam, and I'm going to put a clip here. And I do a couple clips along the way, because again, I really want to be sure that my seam allowance is laying flat. So I'll fold this down, put this under my needle, needle down, presser foot down, and then I take away the clip. And I can go a couple stitches. Oops, that was the break thread. That was the cut thread part of the petal. I'm on a learning curve with this new machine, but I love it. Listen to this machine. And I'm going through a zipper, 2 layers of Soft and Stable, and 5 layers of fabric. So this machine is a workhorse. So I'm adding this little bit of binding, not binding, but you could call it binding. This little, the lining fabric. I'm using a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Go forward and go back. And now I'm going to trim it like magic, like magic. So, so there it is. So the final step in covering the seam, which I think does a really nice and finished look, is to bring this around and turn this and fold it under, and then I will clip this, and then I'll just do that same thing as I go. Sometimes you get a little bit of threads and you just want to cut some of those away. So I'll put this here, put my needle down, rotate this into the place that I want it, do a couple stitches forward and a couple stitches back, and then I'll take my clip out. And this is a generous enough piece that I know if I stitch on the fold, it won't come unraveled. That raw edge is nicely folded, hidden in there. And when we get to the bottom, you'll see that I already cut the notch out, and we'll talk about that notch in just a second. But I do this seam covering before I sew that boxed bottom closed. Back stitch, cut. It's magic. And then I will trim this to match the box bottom. So the box bottom, and the box bottom, you'll remember, is what gives your bag this nice looking bottom. And I found if I cut that out in a form of a notch, as I've done here, then the bottoms are going to match up each and every time. And it's important to do this cutting before you add your binding, because your binding, you can see that I've got a little extra give here. The binding dimension may or may not be as accurate as just cutting from the seam itself. So what the instructions are 1.5 inch square. So this is from the raw edge of the seam, the soft and stable and fabric seam, 1.5 inches in, and then the same thing from the raw bottom here, 1.5 inches. Then be sure your zipper is open, and reach inside, and be sure that your fabric is laying flat inside, and then I'm going to sandwich these. I'm going to nest these seams, and since I nested this one going to that direction, I want to nest that one going that direction too. Now it looks like I got a little kitty wampus in my cutting, which is not going to be a problem. I'm just going to take my 1/4 inch seam here, needle down, press your foot down, and then I take out my clip, go in reverse. I usually do a reverse right there, so this might be a generous 1/4 inch. I'll trim that off, but let's see what that ends up looking like, just for the sake of curiosity. Yeah, that's not too bad. Maybe it's approaching 3/8, but still it's going to look nice. Trim off some of this excess, because then I am going to come back and cover that seam just like I covered the other seam. So I'll show, I sewed this on right sides together, bring this around, I'm going to fold this end in, I'm going to clip it. I love these Wonder Clips. Oh my goodness. This would be really a pain in the neck to pin. Okay, so put my needle here, needle down, press your foot down, and I can pull off this first clip. I can do a reverse stitch here, and I'm going to use my seam ripper to pull that one piece forward so I'm sure I catch it. It's tempting to use your fingers, but it's awful close here. You don't want to do that. All the way down, back stitch a couple stitches, and then the magic, the Juki, and it will break your stitch. It'll cut your thread. And then I cut this off, and I cut this off, and I've experimented with a lot of different ways of finishing this. My favorite way of finishing this is a couple drops of fray check right here. Then when you turn, and of course I would finish this one as well, but I don't want to bore you with watching me sew in too much. Turn it right side out, push your corners out, and there is your cute little bag. And you want to just take a little extra effort to get that zipper started. And sometimes I go in and stitch this seam allowance down. You can do that too, but there you are. And just for fun, I had a little bit of an extra zipper from this actually. I took the facing off it and just added it. You could add your keys to this, or you could put this, I don't know what you could do with that, but I think it just gives it a little dress up. So you could also add it to your pull. That would be super cute. You can add a ribbon to your pull, also super cute. You can do a jump ring and a charm, all kinds of fun things. So that is Millie P's 1 hour pouch. Thanks everybody.